The air inside the National Cybersecurity Directorate's training vault was cold, recycled, and smelled faintly of ozone and burnt coffee. It was a place designed to simulate the pressures of digital warfare, a concrete box filled with holographic displays and humming servers where the next generation of America's cyber warriors were forged. And in that high-stakes crucible, trainee Maya Jenkins was failing. Not for lack of intellect. Her test scores were astronomical, but for her method. While other trainees attacked the simulation drills with aggressive, rapid-fire coding, Maya was quiet, methodical, almost maddeningly slow. She treated each line of code not as a target, but as a piece of a story she needed to understand. Her instructor, Director Evans, a man whose patience had been worn thin by years in the field, saw her approach as a fatal flaw. He stood behind her station now, his arms crossed, his shadow falling over her screen. "Jenkins," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire class to hear. "This is Operation Swift Hammer, not Operation Let's Ponder the Metaphysical Implications of a Denial of Service Attack. The goal is to neutralize the threat in under 5 minutes. You're at 7, and you've written 3 lines of defensive script." A few of the other trainees snickered. Maya didn't look up from her screen. A complex algorithm was unfolding, a simulated virus designed to mimic a state-sponsored attack on a power grid. Instead of building a firewall like the others, she was tracing the virus's data packets back to their source, analyzing their structure. "I'm looking for the vulnerability in its logic, sir," she said, her voice soft. "It has a recursive loop that seems inefficient. It's a weakness." Evans scoffed. "It's a simulation, Jenkins. It's designed to be a blunt instrument, not a work of art. Your job is to build a wall, not psychoanalyze the hammer. You are wasting time." He tapped a button on his master console, and a large red fail flashed across Maya's screen. "Again," he barked. "And this time, try to act like you're actually in a fight." Maya closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, her jaw tightening. She cleared the screen and started again. This was the narrative of her time at the directorate. She was the ghost, the oddity, the one everyone had already labeled a washout. Her background was a mystery. Her file was thin, listing only a series of academic scholarships and a recommendation from a defunct DARPA research grant. To Evans and the other trainees, she was useless, too quiet, too slow, too cerebral for the brutal, fast-paced world of cyber warfare. They didn't see the elegance in her code, the layers of defensive architecture she built that were almost invisible. They only saw the stopwatch, and by that measure, she always lost. She had accepted her fate. She would fail the final exam, be honorably discharged from the program, and disappear back into the quiet world of theoretical research she had come from. All she had to do was survive one last week, one final simulation. The next day, they were gathered in the main vault for that final test. It was the most complex simulation ever designed by the Directorate, Operation Crimson Aegis. A full-scale, multi-vector cyber attack on the nation's core infrastructure, financial systems, communications, military command and control. "This is not a drill," Evans announced, pacing before the main holographic globe. "This is your final exam. You will work as a team to defend the network. Your enemy is a new generation of AI-driven malware. It learns. It adapts. It is relentless. Do not let it get past the firewall." Maya took her station at the edge of the room, already feeling the familiar weight of her peers' low expectations. The simulation began. The globe lit up with streams of hostile red data, pouring in from all directions. The trainees dove into a frenzy of activity, their fingers flying across their keyboards, shouting out status reports. Firewalls went up. Countermeasures were deployed. It was a chaotic symphony of digital defense. But Maya wasn't looking at the incoming attacks. She was looking at the system itself, at the very code of the simulation. Her instincts, the ones that Evans had so often mocked, were screaming that something was wrong. There was an echo in the system, a shadow process running behind the simulation, something that wasn't part of the test. It was a whisper in the ghost of the machine. "Sir," she said, raising her hand tentatively. Evans shot her an annoyed look. "What is it, Jenkins?" Found another inefficient loop. There's a parasitic process running on the host server, she said, her voice barely carrying over the noise. It's not part of the simulation. It looks like a dormant file listener. Evans rolled his eyes. It's a diagnostic tool. Focus on the mission. But it wasn't a diagnostic tool. It was a key, waiting for a lock. And as the simulated attack reached its peak intensity, that key turned. The parasitic process suddenly activated. The hostile red data streams on the globe vanished, replaced by a deep, pulsing purple that began to spread from the very heart of their own network. The simulation was over. A real attack had just begun. The shift was instantaneous and terrifying. The controlled chaos of the simulation gave way to the raw panic of a real-world crisis. Alarms blared, a piercing, high-pitched shriek that signaled a Level 1 security breach. The holographic globe, once a map of their battlefield, now showed their own facility as the source of the attack. The purple virus was spreading outwards from their core servers, a digital cancer consuming everything it touched. "What is this?" Director Evans roared, his face pale. "Shut down the simulation. Now." A senior technician at the master console typed frantically. "I can't, sir. We're locked out. The virus has seized control of the primary command functions. It's using our own simulation protocols to mask its signature." "Cut the power," another instructor shouted. "We can't," the tech shot back. "It's already breached the physical network controls. Cutting power would trigger a cascading failure and wipe the entire facility's data stores. Decades of intelligence gone." The room was a whirlwind of shouted orders and frantic, useless actions. The trainees, moments ago confident warriors in a simulated war, were now just terrified students watching their instructors fail. They were trapped inside their own fortress, which was now turning its guns on the outside world. Maya Jenkins, however, was still. Amid the chaos, she was an island of preternatural calm. She wasn't looking at the globe or the alarms. She was looking at the code, at the pure, elegant, terrifying language of the virus as it scrolled across her monitor. She recognized it. Not the virus itself, but its structure, its philosophy. It was based on a theoretical model she had co-authored years ago during her time in that DARPA think tank. A concept for a sentient defensive code, one that could learn and evolve. A system so advanced, so dangerous, it was deemed purely hypothetical and locked away. Someone had taken her theory and weaponized it. They had turned her creation into a monster. "It's a logic-based entity," she said, her voice cutting through the panic. Everyone turned to look at her. The useless trainee was speaking with an authority that silenced the room. "It's not attacking with brute force," she continued, her eyes never leaving the screen. "It's asking a question. It's testing the system for a specific vulnerability, and when it finds it, it will use that entry point to replicate itself across the entire national grid." Evans strode over to her, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "And what vulnerability would that be, trainee, since you seem to be on a first-name basis with this thing?" Maya finally looked up at him, her gaze clear and direct. "It's looking for a system with paradoxical permissions. A network that is both open and closed at the same time. Like a training academy that simulates attacks on a live, connected server." The color drained from Evans's face. The entire design of the academy, its greatest strength, was the very weakness the virus was built to exploit. "This facility is the key," Maya whispered, "and we just handed it the lock." The purple on the globe pulsed faster, spreading now to nodes marked Pentagon and Fa. A new timer appeared on the screen. Grid saturation in T-minus 1,500 hours. They had 15 minutes before the virus was in control of the country's most critical infrastructure. Evans, for the first time in his career, looked truly lost. He stared at the timer, then at his instructors, then finally at Maya. The scorn was gone from his eyes, replaced by a desperate, dawning realization. The girl he had dismissed as a worthless thinker might be the only person in the world who understood the thoughts of the monster at their gates. The 15-minute countdown clock on the main screen cast a morbid, pulsing glow across the faces of everyone in the vault. Each second that ticked away felt like a hammer blow. Director Evans, stripped of his usual bluster, was now coordinating a desperate, failing defense. His instructors were throwing every countermeasure they had at the virus, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. The AI-driven malware simply absorbed their attacks, learned from them, and grew stronger. It's rewriting our firewalls as fast as we can build them, a senior instructor said, his voice strained. It's not just bypassing our defenses, it's consuming them. Evans turned to his communications officer. Have you gotten through to the Pentagon's cyber command? They're seeing the breach, sir, but they can't isolate us. The virus is spoofing our signature. To them, we look like a secure facility running a diagnostic. They don't see the attack originating from inside. The trap was perfect. They were a Trojan horse, and the virus was about to pour out into the heart of the city. Evans looked at the clock. 12 minutes left. He made a decision. Initiate the Iron Sleep protocol, he said, his voice heavy. The room went silent. Iron Sleep was the ultimate last resort, a protocol that had never been used. It would trigger a series of targeted electromagnetic pulses throughout the facility, frying every server, every hard drive, every piece of electronics. It would stop the virus, but at the cost of everything. The Academy's research, the active intelligence files, the entire digital archive, all of it would be vaporized. It was a self-inflicted lobotomy to save the body. Sir, are you sure? A technician asked quietly. The data loss is better than losing the entire country, Evans snapped. Do it. As the technician moved to the shielded console that controlled the protocol, Maya stood up. That won't work, sir. Evans spun around. Jenkins, I gave you an order to stand down. The virus is AI-driven, she said, her voice ringing with certainty. It will have already anticipated a scorched earth protocol. It has likely already created a compressed, encrypted copy of itself and embedded it in a low-power system. The emergency lighting, the climate control, something you won't fry. The moment you bring the system back online, it will re-emerge. Wiping the servers will only slow it down and blind us in the process. Evans stared at her, his face a battleground of pride and fear. Everything his training told him was to follow protocol to cut out the infection. But her logic was undeniable. This thing didn't play by their rules. Then what do you propose we do? He asked, the question in admission of his own defeat. We let it in, Maya said simply. The entire room looked at her as if she were insane. We open the final gateway, she explained, walking towards the main holographic display. It's looking for a final piece of data to complete its objective. Right now, it's hammering against the last firewall. If we drop that wall, it will rush in. And for a fraction of a second, in its haste to reach its goal, its own defenses will be lowered. That's when we strike. Strike with what? Evans demanded. We've thrown everything we have at it. You've been fighting it, Maya corrected. You haven't tried talking to it. She turned to a console, her fingers already flying. This virus is based on my old research. It communicates in a specific, syntax-based language. It's looking for a response, not a fight. I can write a paradoxical query, a logic loop that it can't solve. It won't destroy it, but it will trap it, forcing it into a dormant state. Evans was speechless. The idea was insane, a wild gamble based on the word of a trainee he had openly despised. But as he looked at the clock, 9 minutes, and at the panicked faces of his instructors, he realized he had no other options. The protocols had failed. The warriors had failed. Maybe it was time to let the thinker have her turn. The console is yours, Jenkins, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Maya nodded once and sat down. She wasn't a trainee anymore. She was the only doctor who could speak the language of the disease. She closed her eyes, shut out the alarms and the shouting, and began to code. She wasn't building a wall. She was composing a question, a single, perfect riddle that could bring a monster to its knees. The fate of the nation's entire digital infrastructure now rested on the quiet, methodical mind of the girl everyone had called useless. The vault had become a strange bubble of silence around Maya Station. While alarms still blared and the countdown clock ticked relentlessly lower, a 10-foot radius of focused calm surrounded the trainee. Director Evans and his top instructors stood behind her, watching the lines of code appear on her screen. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't defensive, wasn't offensive. It was lyrical, almost philosophical. She was weaving a tapestry of pure logic. She's not writing a countermeasure. One of the instructors whispered in awe. She's writing a poem. 5 minutes, a technician shouted from across the room. The purple of the virus on the holographic globe had now infected the networks of every major federal agency. It was poised for its final move. Jenkins, what's your status? Evans asked, his voice tight with anxiety. I'm almost ready, Maya replied without looking up. I need you to drop the primary firewall on my mark. All of it. Give the virus a clear path to the core data hub. Evans hesitated. It was the single most counterintuitive order he had ever heard. It was like telling a defending army to open the castle gates. Are you certain? It's the only way, she said. It has to believe it's won. It needs to feel the prize in its grasp. Evans looked at his team, then back at Maya. His career, his reputation, his country. It all came down to this moment, to trusting the one person he had been so determined to break. Do it, he said to his lead technician. On her mark, open the gates. The technician nodded, his hand hovering over the master control. 3 minutes, Maya said, her fingers a blur. The final lines of her paradoxical code flowed onto the screen. It was a beautiful, elegant trap, a question that answered itself with a question, a loop that had no beginning and no end. It was a digital Ouroboros. Now, she said, drop the firewall. The technician hit the command. On the holographic globe, the last shimmering blue line of defense vanished. The purple virus surged forward in a massive wave, flooding the central node representing the Academy's core servers. The virus had won. It had reached the heart of the system. But just as it began to access the data, Maya executed her program. She didn't inject it. She released it into the data stream like a whisper. Her code, her logical paradox, flowed into the virus not as a weapon, but as an answer to the question it had been asking. The virus consumed it instantly. For a single, terrifying second, the entire globe glowed a violent, triumphant purple. Then, the color began to recede. The pulsing stopped. The aggressive expansion halted. The virus, caught in an infinite logical loop, trying to solve an unsolvable riddle, simply froze. It was dormant, trapped within itself, a dragon that had swallowed its own tail. The alarm stopped. The countdown clock vanished. The vault was plunged into a stunned, absolute silence. On the main screen, the virus's code, once a chaotic cascade, now arranged itself into a single, perfectly formed sentence in an archaic programming language. Query unsolvable. System hibernating. They had done it. She had done it. Maya leaned back in her chair, a single bead of sweat rolling down her temple. She was breathing heavily, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. Evans stared at the screen, then at her, his face a mixture of awe, relief, and profound, humbling shock. You did it, he stammered. You talked it to sleep. Before anyone could celebrate, a new sound cut through the silence. Not an alarm, but the heavy, thudding chop of helicopter blades, growing rapidly louder. It was impossibly close, right outside. Then, the main blast doors to the vault, doors designed to withstand a direct missile strike, were thrown open from the outside. A team of Secret Service agents, clad in black tactical gear, swarmed into the room, weapons raised. They were followed by a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, an earpiece in his ear. The agents created a perimeter, their movements precise and overwhelming. The trainees and instructors froze, hands raised. Evans stepped forward, his face hardening. I am Director Evans of this facility. Who are you? What is the meaning of this? The man in the suit ignored him completely. His eyes scanned the room, passed over the instructors, the trainees, and finally landed on Maya, who was still sitting at her console. He walked directly to her, the agents clearing a path. Outside, the roar of the helicopter was deafening. It was landing on the main lawn, its downdraft whipping debris against the windows. It wasn't a military transport. It was Marine One. The man in the suit stopped in front of Maya. "Trainee Jenkins," he asked, his voice calm amidst the controlled chaos. Evans stepped forward again. "This trainee is under my command and is currently in the middle of The president is on a secure line," the agent said, cutting him off without a glance. "He needs to speak with her. Immediately." The entire room froze. Every eye turned to Maya, the useless trainee, the quiet girl who was always last, the one they had all written off. Director Evans stood speechless, his mouth agape, as he watched the agent hand a satellite phone to her. The President of the United States was calling, and outside, his personal helicopter was waiting. For her, the silence in the vault was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the Secret Service agents' radios and the distant, powerful thrum of Marine One's rotors. Every person in the room, trainees, instructors, Director Evans, stared, paralyzed by the sheer surreality of the moment. The useless trainee, Maya Jenkins, was now the calm center of a storm that reached all the way to the Oval Office. She took the satellite phone from the agent, her hand surprisingly steady. "This is Jenkins," she said, her voice quiet but clear. She listened for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Yes, Mr. President. I understand. No, the threat is dormant, not eliminated. It's a derivative of the Chimera Protocol. Yes, I wrote the original white paper." Director Evans felt the floor drop out from under him. The Chimera Protocol was a legend, a theoretical deep state project from over a decade ago, rumored to be a blueprint for a new kind of cyber sovereignty. It was so classified that most of the people in this room didn't even have the clearance to know its name. And Jenkins, his trainee, had written it. The presidential agent, whose name was apparently Mark, turned to Evans. "Director, we are commandeering this facility under executive order. Your team will stand down and cooperate fully." Evans, humbled and still reeling, could only nod dumbly. His authority, which had been the bedrock of his identity, had evaporated in less than 30 seconds. Maya continued her conversation, her back to the room. "The best course of action is to create a resonant frequency to keep it dormant while we analyze its new components. No, sir, wiping the servers is still the worst possible option. You need me to see the code firsthand." She listened again, then nodded. "I'll be there as soon as I can." She handed the phone back to Mark. "You want a full brief at the White House Situation Room. Now." Mark nodded. "Marine One is waiting." He gestured to two of his agents, who moved to escort her. As Maya stood, she finally looked at Director Evans. There was no triumph in her eyes, no, "I told you so." There was only a quiet, weary resolve. "Director," she said, her tone professional, "I'll need a full data packet of the virus's behavior from the moment of activation. Please have it ready for my team." Asterisk my team. Asterisk the words hung in the air. She was no longer a trainee taking orders. She was giving them. Evans, his face ashen, simply replied, "Yes, ma'am." The other trainees watched in stunned silence as Maya was escorted out of the vault. They looked at each other, their earlier mockery and annoyance now replaced by a profound sense of awe and confusion. They had been training to be warriors, but they had been sitting next to a god of the digital world, and they hadn't even known it. As Maya walked across the lawn toward the waiting helicopter, the wind from its rotors whipping her hair, she felt a strange sense of detachment. She was leaving the academy behind, a place where she had been systematically underestimated. Now, she was being thrust back into the world she had tried to escape, a world of shadows, secrets, and nation-altering code. It wasn't what she wanted. She had come to the academy seeking structure, seeking to be a small part of a larger machine, to be normal. But her mind, her creation had followed her. The Secret Service agent held the door of Marine One open for her. Before she stepped inside, she looked back one last time at the training vault. Through the window, she could see the faint outline of her peers, still standing frozen in disbelief. They had all said she was useless, a failure. But they'd been trying to teach her how to fight a war that was already obsolete. She had been preparing for the next one all along. As the helicopter lifted off, the academy shrinking below, she knew her life had been irrevocably split into two parts. Before the call, and after. The quiet, methodical girl was gone. In her place was the one person who could speak the language of the ghost and the machine, and the president was waiting to hear what it had to say. The flight to Washington, D.C. was a blur of motion and encrypted briefings. Maya sat across from the president's national security advisor, a man named General Renner, whose face was a roadmap of past conflicts. He didn't ask about her training or her time at the academy. He asked about the code. The Chimera Protocol was supposed to be a theoretical defense, he said, his voice a low gravel. A self-evolving network that could predict and neutralize threats before they even formed. It was deemed too unstable, too dangerous. We ordered the project terminated and all research archived. You archived the research, Maya corrected gently. You didn't erase the theory. Someone took my work and inverted it. They turned a shield into a sword. Inside the White House Situation Room, the atmosphere was thick with a controlled panic. The nation's top military and intelligence minds were gathered, their faces grim. When Maya walked in, still in her simple trainee uniform, a wave of silent curiosity washed over the room. The President of the United States stood to greet her. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, extending a hand. "I've read your file, or what little of it exists. It seems we owe you a debt of gratitude." Maya shook his hand. "The debt is not yet paid, sir. The virus is sleeping, but it's not dead." For the next hour, Maya stood before a massive interactive screen, breaking down the complex architecture of the virus. She spoke with a clarity and confidence that belied her age. She explained how the malware, which they were now calling Janus, was not just a weapon, but a message. It had been activated by a deep state actor who wanted to prove that the country's entire cyber defense infrastructure was a house of cards. Director Evans, who had been flown in separately, stood at the back of the room, a silent, humbled spectator. He watched his former trainee command the attention of the most powerful people on the planet, and he finally understood. Her slowness, her methodical approach, wasn't a flaw. It was genius. It was the only way to comprehend a threat this complex. "So, what's your recommendation?" the president asked when she finished. "We can't fight it with conventional means," Maya stated. "Janus is too fast, too smart. We can't kill it without risking catastrophic collateral damage. We need to create a warden, a new system based on the original Chimera Protocol, designed to contain and study it. We need to learn from it, understand its evolution, and build our next generation of defenses around it." "And who would lead such a project?" General Renner asked, though he already knew the answer. Maya met his gaze. "I would." There was a long silence. The idea was audacious. To give a 20-year-old, a trainee who had been on the verge of washing out, command of a new, top-secret national security division. But everyone in that room had seen the alternative. They had stared into the abyss, and she was the only one who had known how to make it blink. The president nodded. "Draft the directive," he said to an aide. "Give Ms. Jenkins everything she needs. She is now the acting director of Project Chimera." As the meeting concluded, Director Evans approached Maya. He didn't make excuses. He didn't apologize. He just looked at her with a newfound respect. They never understood your methods," he said. "Because I was training for a war none of you knew had already begun," Maya replied, not with arrogance, but with a simple statement of fact. She turned to leave, but Evans stopped her one last time. "Director Jenkins," he said, testing the new title, "what are your orders?" Maya paused at the door. A faint smile touched her lips. "Get some sleep, Director. The real work begins at dawn." She walked out of the Situation Room and into the quiet halls of the White House. The world had called her useless, a failure, a ghost. But the future of the nation's security now rested on her shoulders. She was no longer running from a machine. She was being asked to build a better one. The girl who was deemed a failure was now the last line of defense. The first days of Project Chimera were a whirlwind. Maya was given a secure, subterranean facility outside Annapolis, a state-of-the-art lab that had been mothballed for a decade. She was also given a blank check and the authority to recruit anyone she needed from any agency, military or civilian. Her first call was not to a seasoned general or a world-renowned coder, but to a small group of her fellow trainees from the academy, the ones who had been curious about her methods, the ones who had asked questions instead of mocking her. They were the thinkers, the artists of the code, and she knew she would need their creativity, not just the brute force of the established warriors. Director Evans, at his own request, was reassigned to act as her liaison with the traditional military command structures. It was a humbling role for him, but he accepted it with a quiet dignity. He had seen the future, and he knew his job now was to bridge the gap between the old guard and the new. Maya and her small team worked relentlessly, not try to destroy the dormant Janus virus, but to build its prison. They designed a new kind of digital ecosystem, a contained network where Janus could be observed, studied, and even baited. Maya called it the Labyrinth. It was a work of genius, a system that was both a cage and a classroom. One late night, as Maya worked alone in the server room, General Renner paid her a surprise visit. He watched her for a while, a silent observer. "You never wanted this, did you?" he finally asked. Maya looked up from her screen, her eyes tired but bright. "No one ever wants a war, General. You just fight the one you're given." Renner nodded. "The President is announcing the formation of the new U.S. Cyber Command next week. He wants you to be its public face, the girl who saved the world." Maya shook her head. "No. The strength of this defense is its secrecy. The world can think their old walls are still standing. It's better if they don't know about the monster we're keeping in the basement, or the people who are guarding it." He respected her decision. The world didn't need another hero to put on a pedestal. It needed quiet guardians, people who worked in the shadows to keep the lights on. Months turned into a year. The Labyrinth was a success. Maya and her team not only contained Janus, but learned from it, using its adaptive capabilities to build predictive defense models that were light years ahead of anything else on the planet. They stopped dozens of potential breaches before they ever happened, silent victories that no one would ever know about. She never returned to the academy. But one day, she received a package. Inside was a small, framed plaque. It was her final exam score from Operation Crimson Aegis. Next to the word result, Director Evans had crossed out fail and written a single word, exemplary. Below it, in his own handwriting, he had added note, "Some of us build walls. You taught us it's better to understand the tide." Maya placed the plaque on a shelf in her office. It was the only award she ever accepted. She had been called useless, a failure. She had been dismissed and ridiculed. But in the end, the quiet thinker had proven that the most powerful weapon in any war isn't the one that makes the most noise, but the one that understands the silence. And in the silent, digital world she now commanded, she was finally home. The helicopter that had landed for her wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the moment the world finally caught up to the future she had been living in all along.